Have you ever looked at your bank account at the end of the month and thought, where did all of it go? You got paid, you handled the rent, a few subscriptions hit, a couple dinners out, gas, groceries, random stuff from Amazon that seemed reasonable at the time, and somehow the month closed with maybe $300 left, if you were lucky. Now compare that with a country where households have, for decades, saved at rates that sound almost made up to an American audience. In China, saving is often treated like breathing. It's expected, it's built into family thinking. It shows up in daily decisions, in long-term planning, in how parents talk to kids, and how people think about debt, risk, security, and status. And when you zoom out, the gap gets pretty uncomfortable, because a lot of Americans think they have an income problem. Sometimes they do. But a huge number of people also have a money design problem. Their financial life is built around spending first and saving later, which is kind of like saying, I'll start exercising after I finish every dessert in the fridge. Maybe, probably not. And this is why the Chinese saving story is so interesting. It's bigger than budgets. It's really a story about what a culture rewards, what it fears, and what it teaches people to do with the next dollar that lands in their hands. Now, this video is not about telling you to live on instant noodles and save 80% of your income. For most people in the US, that's unrealistic. And honestly, it misses the point. The useful lesson is deeper than that. Because the real advantage is not some magical spreadsheet. It's the mental operating system underneath the spreadsheet. And once you see that, a lot of American money behavior starts to look very strange. Here's the first big difference. In the US, saving is often what happens after life. In a lot of Chinese households, saving is part of life. That sounds small. It isn't. It changes everything. Think about two people who both earn $5,000 a month after taxes. Person A treats saving like leftovers. They spend through the month and move whatever remains into savings at the end. Usually that ends up being $200, sometimes zero. On a good month, maybe $400. Person B moves $1,000 into savings or investments the day they get paid. Then they build the month around the remaining $4,000. Same income, totally different structure. Fast forward 10 years. If person A saves $200 a month and gets a 7% annual return, they end up with around $34,000. If person B saves $1,000 a month at the same return, they end up with around $173,000. That's a difference of roughly $139,000. Same paycheck, different default. And that's before we even get into behavior spillover. Because when saving happens first, spending has to become more intentional. You notice your habits faster. You question convenience more often. You become aware of how much money disappears into things you barely remember buying. This is where most people start saying, okay, sure, but Americans have higher costs. Yes, housing is expensive. Healthcare is expensive. Childcare is expensive. Life in the US has real structural pressure. Still, plenty of money leaks happen far below that level. The silent leaks, the ones that don't feel like major decisions. The upgraded car payment, the forever subscriptions, the food delivery habit that became a lifestyle. The I work hard, I deserve this purchases that show up 3 times a week. The problem is rarely one huge disaster. It's usually 1,000 tiny permissions. And Chinese saving culture tends to push in the opposite direction. It asks a very different question. Does this purchase improve our future? That's a powerful filter, because a lot of spending doesn't survive contact with that question. A $1,200 phone upgrade every 2 years? Maybe, maybe not. Let's do the math. Say you choose a $500 phone instead and invest the $700 difference. Do that every 2 years for 20 years, earning 7%. That alone grows to roughly $30,000 from phones. That's the kind of math people miss because the purchase feels normal. Normal is expensive. That may be the most dangerous word in personal finance. People buy what their environment tells them is normal. And this is where China and America really split. In America, visible consumption often carries social value. Nice car, nice watch, better neighborhood, better gym, better version of everything. People say they don't care what others think. Then they finance a lifestyle to impress people they barely like. In many Chinese households, or at least in the saving culture that became deeply rooted over time, status can also come from restraint, discipline, family security, property ownership, educational progress, and financial preparedness. That creates a different game. If your environment rewards prudence, prudence gets easier. If your environment rewards appearances, savings get harder. And most people underestimate how much of their financial behavior is borrowed from the people around them. Let's take a simple example. Imagine two friends making $90,000 a year. One buys a new SUV with a $900 monthly payment. Insurance goes up, fuel costs rise, registration is higher. The real cost might be $1,200 a month once everything is included. The other buys a reliable used car and keeps total transportation costs at $450 a month. That gap is $750 every month. Over 10 years, invested at 7%, that difference could grow to around $130,000 from one category, one choice, one area where normal can quietly torch a six-figure chunk of wealth. This is the part people hate hearing. Big financial outcomes often come from boring decisions repeated for years. And Chinese households, broadly speaking, have historically been very good at boring decisions. Very good at waiting. Very good at saying later. That ability to delay gratification is unbelievably valuable, because wealth building is basically a long conversation between your present self and your future self. Your present self wants comfort, novelty, convenience, and proof that life is going well. Your future self wants options, freedom, time, a lower stress baseline, a paid-off life. And those two versions of you are constantly negotiating. In many parts of American culture, present you has a really persuasive publicist. Every ad says you deserve more. Every app makes spending frictionless. Every platform turns aspiration into consumption. See it, want it, tap it, own it. Which would be fine if income kept rising and emergencies never happened and retirement funded itself. Sadly, that is not the current setup. In a high-saving culture, delayed gratification becomes emotionally normal. That's huge, because if restraint feels like punishment, you won't sustain it. If restraint feels like intelligence, you can repeat it for decades. And repetition is where the compounding starts to matter. Here's where things get more interesting. A lot of Chinese saving behavior is also driven by uncertainty. That part matters. When people feel less protected by social systems, they self-insure. They save for medical problems. They save for aging parents. They save for their own retirement. They save because no one is coming to rescue the spreadsheet. That creates urgency. In the US, many people assume future systems will fill the gap. Social security, employer retirement plans, credit access, insurance, maybe family. Maybe the market bails them out. Maybe something works out. That something works out mindset is way more common than people admit. And it can be financially lethal, because vague optimism tends to produce vague preparation. Let's make this practical. Say someone tells themselves they'll catch up later. They're 30 years old and invest nothing for 10 years. Then at 40, they start investing $800 a month until 65 at a 7% annual return. They end up with about $607,000. Sounds decent. Now take someone who starts at 30 with the same $800 a month and continues to 65. They end up with around $1.33 million. That 10-year delay cost them over $700,000. Same monthly amount. The difference was timing. This is why a saving culture matters so much. It doesn't just increase the amount saved, it starts the clock earlier. And in investing, early matters in a way that almost feels unfair. Now let's talk about debt, because this is another place where the contrast gets very sharp. In the US, debt is incredibly normalized. Student loans, car loans, credit cards, buy now, pay later, furniture payments, phone payments, vacation financing, which remains one of the strangest phrases ever invented. Debt has been repackaged as convenience, as flexibility, as adulthood. Sometimes debt is strategic. A mortgage at a reasonable rate for a home you can actually afford can make sense. A business loan with a clear return can make sense. Even student debt can make sense in certain cases. But consumer debt as a lifestyle tool, that's where people get trapped. Because debt steals future cash flow. It takes tomorrow's options and spends them today. And once enough of your income is already spoken for, saving starts to feel impossible. Look at a household carrying $12,000 in credit card debt at 22% interest. Minimum payments keep them afloat, sort of. Yet, a huge portion of every payment goes to interest. If they only make minimum payments, that debt can haunt them for years. If instead they attack it aggressively and free up, say, $500 a month, that same $500 can later be redirected into investing. Invest $500 a month for 25 years at 7%, and you get around $379,000. So the cost of high-interest debt is never just interest. It's also the wealth that money never gets the chance to build. This is why anti-debt cultures often create stronger savers. Their monthly cash flow remains more available. They save before buying. They purchase from accumulated money instead of future promises. That slows down gratification. It also builds actual ownership. And there's a psychological bonus here. Cash spending hurts in a useful way. It makes cost feel real. Financing softens the pain up front and stretches it into the future, which sounds easier until your future self inherits 5 separate payments and a mild panic disorder every time the card statement arrives. Now here's the middle of the story where the whole thing shifts. Because most people think high-saving cultures are mainly about sacrifice. Rice, beans, spreadsheets, no fun, lights off by 8 p.m. That's not the most important part. The deeper advantage is clarity. Clarity around priorities. Clarity around date-offs. Clarity around the difference between comfort and performance. A lot of families in strong saving cultures know what the money is for. That changes behavior immediately. Saving for the future is too vague for most people. Saving for a home down payment in 4 years feels real. Saving so your parents can retire safely feels real. Saving so your child can graduate without crushing debt feels real. Saving so you can leave a toxic job without fear feels very real. Money needs a mission. Otherwise, it gets outcompeted by things that offer immediate dopamine. This is why families that openly discuss money often do better. Everyone understands the plan. Everyone knows the trade-offs. Everyone sees the scoreboard. That reduces friction. It also reduces sabotage. If a teenager understands the household is building a down payment, random luxury requests start looking different. If a couple shares the same goal, skipping a $150 dinner feels like progress instead of deprivation. American households often do the opposite. Money becomes awkward, private, foggy. Couples avoid the topic until there's stress. Parents hide the tension from kids. People spend individually and hope the totals somehow cooperate. That creates confusion, and confusion is expensive. You cannot control money you refuse to look at clearly. This leads to one of the most useful lessons from Chinese saving behavior: tracking. Tracking sounds boring, because it is boring, and it works anyway. When you track spending in detail, the fantasy version of your finances collides with the real one. That is uncomfortable for about 3 days. Then it becomes liberating, because now you know. You know how much convenience costs you. You know which subscriptions have been stealing money for 8 months. You know whether "we barely spend on eating out" is true or a beautiful lie. Imagine someone who spends an extra $18 a day on convenience without realizing it. Coffee here, delivery fee there, impulse snacks, rideshare upgrade, app purchase. $18 a day feels tiny. Over a year, that's $6,570. Invested annually for 20 years at 7%, that habit could represent over $269,000. That's the thing about small spending. It stays invisible until you multiply it. And multiplication is where personal finance gets emotional. Because once you see the future value, a casual habit suddenly has a price tag. This doesn't mean every small pleasure should be eliminated. Please keep your coffee if you love your coffee. The point is awareness. Spend intentionally. Spend where happiness is real. Cut hard where spending is lazy, automatic, or socially borrowed. That balance matters. Extreme frugality can become its own form of dysfunction. You can absolutely overdo this. You can optimize your budget so hard that your life starts to feel like a punishment spreadsheet. That's not the goal. The goal is to direct money toward things that genuinely matter and away from things that quietly weaken your future. This is also where the Chinese focus on education becomes fascinating. Many families there have historically viewed education as one of the highest return investments available. And from a financial standpoint, that logic is powerful. Imagine a family spends heavily on tutoring, skill building, or academic support over many years. At first glance, it looks expensive. But if that investment increases lifetime earning power by even $20,000 per year, across a 30-year career, that's $600,000 in added earnings. Even after taxes and even after accounting for the cost of the education, the return can be enormous. This mindset reframes spending. It asks, is this consumption or is this capability? Those are very different categories. The same logic works in the US. A course that improves your skills and raises income is different from a purchase that gives you a fun weekend and then disappears. A certification that moves your salary from $70,000 to $90,000 can have a 6-figure lifetime effect. That doesn't mean every educational product is worth it. A lot of them are overpriced nonsense with good lighting and dramatic thumbnails. Still, the broader principle is strong. Spend aggressively on what increases earning power or protects future stability. Be ruthless with spending that only performs status. That might be the cleanest wealth rule in this entire video. Now let's talk about happiness, because this is where people usually get nervous. Whenever saving comes up, someone says, "Yeah, but I don't want to spend my whole life depriving myself." Fair, you shouldn't. The better question is this: what kind of spending actually improves your life per dollar? That's the question high-saving people answer better. Many of them learn to enjoy lower-cost routines, home meals, walks, community, simple hobbies, time with family, low-maintenance fun. These things do something very powerful. They reduce the cost of being content. That's a superpower. If your happiness requires expensive stimulation all the time, your financial floor rises dramatically. You need more income just to feel normal. You need more upgrades to feel momentum. You need more consumption to feel like life is working. That creates fragility. If your happiness can exist inside relatively modest spending, your life gets more resilient. A recession hurts less. A layoff is less terrifying. A career pivot becomes possible. A savings rate increases without misery. That resilience is one of the least glamorous and most valuable forms of wealth. And it's probably the part of this story Americans need most. Because a lot of people are chasing a rich-looking life while undermining the actual freedom that wealth is supposed to provide. They have the apartment, the car, the outfits, the dining habits, the travel photos. And underneath it all, very little margin, very little breathing room, very little ability to say no. That's a stressful way to live. Here's a contrast that makes this really clear. Two households earn $150,000 per year. Household 1 spends $140,000 and saves $10,000. Household 2 spends $105,000 and saves $45,000. After 10 years, assuming 7% annual returns, Household 1 ends up with around $138,000 from those contributions. Household 2 ends up with around $622,000. Same income, different lifestyle design, different future. One household has a decent image of success. The other has growing ownership of time. And time is the thing everyone says they want. Now, does this mean Americans should try to save 40% of their income overnight? No. That would probably lead to one weird month, a lot of resentment, and an expensive rebound weekend. What actually works is adopting the underlying mechanics. Save first, track honestly, reduce lifestyle inflation, be suspicious of debt, question normal, define what money is for, invest in capability, lower the cost of being happy. That's the real framework. If you want to make this practical, start here. First, choose a savings number that moves automatically the day you get paid. Even 10% is a powerful beginning if you've been saving inconsistently. Second, track every dollar for 30 days. Every dollar. Yes, it's annoying. That's part of why it works. Third, pick one major category to optimize. Housing, transportation, food, or debt. One big category usually matters more than 15 tiny hacks. Fourth, create a rule for income increases. Every raise gets split. Part goes to improving life. Part goes straight to savings or investing. That stops lifestyle inflation from swallowing your progress. And fifth, write down the actual reason you want money, not more security. Get specific. Freedom to leave a bad job. Freedom to buy a home. Freedom to take care of family. Freedom to retire with dignity. Freedom to stop panicking every time your phone buzzes with a bank alert. Specific goals create emotional traction. Vague goals disappear. The deeper lesson from China is not that Americans are lazy and Chinese families are superhuman. That's way too simple. The real lesson is that behavior follows incentives, stories, and systems. If a culture tells people that discipline is respectable, that debt is dangerous, that family stability matters, that tomorrow deserves protection, saving becomes more common. If a culture tells people that consumption equals success, that debt is normal, that convenience is worth almost any premium, and that future problems can be handled later, saving gets harder. So for your own life, the question becomes, which story are you following? The one that says money is for looking successful right now? Or the one that says money is for building a life with options? Because over time, those stories lead to very different places. One leads to recurring payments, chronic pressure, and a permanent need to keep earning at the same intensity. The other leads to flexibility, margin, a little less fear, a little more control, and eventually, a very different relationship with work, time, and stress. That's what wealth is really doing underneath the numbers. It's buying back your ability to choose. And that starts way earlier than most people think. It starts with how you treat the next dollar. So maybe the takeaway here is simple. You do not need to copy another country's lifestyle. You do not need an extreme budget. You do not need to save half your income by next month. You do need a better system than, I'll save whatever's left. Because for most people, there's never much left. And once you understand that, your whole money strategy starts to change. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Liam Invests for more videos on money, investing, and building real financial freedom. And check out the next one.